Greetings and salutations, my friends. Welcome or welcome back to Crime Squad Podcast, a show that covers true crime cases in Canada, both solved and unsolved. I'm your host, Natasha, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who has listened, liked, subscribed. I am so elated that you are all enjoying what you're hearing, and I hope you will keep coming back for more. In today's episode, we're going to dive into a very disturbing topic. I'm going to cover 3 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I will post support resources on my Instagram at Crime Squad Pod. While I don't get into gratuitous detail about the violence, I do need to warn you this episode will feature violence against women. Okay, squad, settle in and let's dive into today's episode. Something is very wrong in Canada. Between 2015 and 2020, Indigenous women and girls have accounted for 24% of all female homicide victims in Canada, even though they make up just 5% of the country's female population. A 2014 report from the RCMP reveals there have been 1,017 homicides of Indigenous women between 1980 and 2012. The numbers reveal a disturbing trend of violence against Indigenous women. According to Statistics Canada, Indigenous women and girls are 12 times more likely to be murdered or missing than other Canadian women. Why is this happening? What is it about Indigenous women and girls specifically? To answer these questions, the Government of Canada was called to action to investigate this horrible reality. The pre-inquiry process began in December of 2015. Over a period of 4 years, the government engaged in open dialogue with family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls from different regions of Canada. In March of 2017, a support services framework was enacted to assist families and survivors through the truth-gathering process. The national inquiry concluded in June of 2019, and a final report was published. Overall, there were over 2,386 participants in the truth-gathering process, which included 1,484 family members and survivors who provided testimony, and 83 experts, knowledge keepers, and officials. The final determination? Persistent and deliberate human and Indigenous rights violations and abuse are the root cause behind Canada's staggering rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and individuals who belong to the LGBTQ Two-Spirit Plus community. I'll just let that sink in for a moment. This is a history of Canada many of us weren't taught in school. But the reality is the Canadian government is responsible for genocide of Canada's Indigenous peoples. The rights of the original stewards of the land have been violated time and time again with the enactment of the Indian Act, residential schools, and the 60s Scoop, just to name a few. Systemic racism is present even today, despite the national inquiries and the truth that has been revealed as part of family and survivor testimony. As a result of the inquiry, and in order to begin the healing process and make real changes to end this unnecessary violence against women, girls, and gender-diverse people, calls to action were published. I encourage you to do some independent research. To read the report, you can access the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls website at www.mmIWG-ffada.ca. To me, knowledge is power. I have done a lot of self-study, including a course in university related to Indigenous culture and tradition. This learning has enabled me to share stories and facts with family, friends, and anyone who will listen. I've had the pleasure of attending 2 virtual meetings with award-winning Cree journalist Connie Walker, where I listened to her speak about what it means to be Indigenous in Canada. I highly recommend you check out Connie's work for yourself. Missing and Murdered is a podcast through CBC, found wherever you listen to your podcasts. It was Missing and Murdered Finding Cleo that really drove home for me that something is rotten in Canada, and I was hungry to learn more and find a way to share stories of victims and survivors. As I began to dive into my investigation, I located a website by CBC News. CBC has a running list of over 300 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and so far they've investigated 34 cases across Canada. These 34 cases have been categorized by authorities as no foul play. But in every single one of these 34 cases, the families of the victims do not accept this ruling by police. In fact, CBC uncovered evidence to suggest there was foul play, and their ultimate recommendation is that these cases be further scrutinized. I scrolled through the page and was shocked at the rows and rows of photographs posted. So many faces, so many names, so many unsolved mysteries, so much hurt. My call to action is to get this information out there any way possible. This podcast is a perfect platform in which to do my best to educate people of this terrible truth and hope that someone somewhere knows something that can help families get closure on these cases. I will continue to create content related to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls on a regular basis, and I encourage you to send me a direct message if you have a story you want me to cover. This episode will feature Abigail Andrews, Annette Margaret Holywhiteman, and Cheyenne Fox. In early April of 2010, 28-year-old Abigail Andrews went shopping with her parents. It was an exciting time because Abigail had just passed the 12-week mark in her pregnancy and was starting to gather supplies to welcome her first child into the world. Bringing a child into the world is a life-changing event, and as she purchased diapers and baby food, her family reported she was in good spirits and excited for what was to come later that October when the baby was set to arrive. Her father, Doug Andrews, was quoted in an article by the CBC as saying, quote, "She had Pampers that she was stockpiling food, all kinds of garments and goodies, in preparation for the birth of her child. She was really excited about it, as were we." End quote. Abigail and her mother, Debbie Andrews, kept in close contact, speaking to each other almost every day. On the evening of April 7th, Abigail called her mother around 7 p.m. to let her know she was leaving her apartment, located on 99th Avenue in Fort St. John, British Columbia, to visit a male friend. Like so many of us do when we talk to friends or family, Debbie told Abigail to call or text her when she got back home from the visit. Abigail confirmed she would do this to let her mother know she was home safe, but when Debbie didn't hear back that night, she knew something was wrong. 2 days went by without any calls or texts. This was completely out of character for Abigail, and her worried family reported her missing on April 9th, 2010. Local and national media broadcast the story, posting pictures of Abigail in the hope someone would come forward with information. In the photos I've seen, Abigail is a breathtakingly beautiful Métis woman. She has almond-shaped hazel eyes, fair skin, a button nose, and full lips displaying a small smile. Her hair is long and brown. At 6 foot and 200 pounds, she wasn't likely to go unnoticed. Searches for Abigail were organized by the Fort St. John RCMP and included the North Peace Search and Rescue Team, as well as the BC Coroner's Service, and a forensic anthropologist. The search began in the North Peace landfill just outside of Fort St. John. The search was completed April 20th, but investigators did not share any information regarding why that particular area was searched or if any clues were discovered. As part of the investigation, police checked Abigail's spending activity to see if there had been any transactions after her disappearance. Her debit card hadn't been used since she went missing. Like so many other cases where the missing person is Indigenous, rumors laced with systemic racism made their way into the atmosphere. One of these rumors was that Abigail liked to party and was hanging out with a bad crowd. This has been disputed by family members who said this wasn't like Abigail at all. Unfortunately, the case went cold. The lack of evidence made it difficult for police to continue their investigation. 3 years after her disappearance, the RCMP released a reenactment video of Abigail's last movements in the hopes this would cause a renewed interest in her case and prompt anyone who knew anything to come forward. Corporal Bill Robinson was quoted in a CBC News article as saying, quote, "Our investigation to date has resulted in the identification of a suspect. We believe this person has spoken to people about what they did. We're asking people to contact us no matter how small or unimportant they feel their information is." End quote. We are now 13 years later, and Abigail and her unborn child have never been found. The family has never received closure of any kind. Seemingly, nothing has come to fruition regarding the suspect, whose name was never released to the public. Abigail was many things: a daughter, a sister, a soon-to-be mother, a dreamer, a lover of nature and poetry. Abigail was responsible and amazing with children. Growing up as the eldest sibling, a lot of the responsibility for childcare fell to her, and she was a very attentive caregiver. Abigail's mother, Debbie Andrews, had this to say about her daughter. Quote, "For us, she was our daughter, she was a person, she has value to us and other people, and we would like to know what has happened to her. So if anybody does have any knowledge of that, I would ask them to come forward and tell the police what they know, whatever it is, so they can do what they need to do in order to find out what happened to our daughter." End quote. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Abigail Andrews, please contact the RCMP E-Division Serious Crime Unit at 778-290-3900. You can also contact Crime Stoppers anonymously at 1-800-222-8477. Annette Margaret Holywhiteman. Tragically, there is not a lot of available information regarding Annette's early life. What we do know is Annette's last confirmed sighting was at Edmonton, Alberta in August of 2008. At that time, she was 44 years old, standing 5'7" tall, weighing approximately 140 pounds. There are 2 pictures of Annette I was able to find. In them, she looks like a woman who has gone through a lot in her life. Still, she radiates an external beauty with her round face, bright eyes, and strong chin. She has slanted brown eyes and long brown hair. An Edmonton social worker named Carrie Thomason, who knew Annette, was quoted in the Edmonton Sun newspaper as saying Annette was a calm, passive woman, but if the situation was warranted, she would be quick to stick up for herself if something didn't feel right. Annette didn't have an easy life by any means, which is true of many Indigenous women and girls across Canada. I do not assign blame to victims or survivors, but this is a very real statistic that uncovers a lot about how Canadians treat Indigenous individuals and have since beginning colonization. At the time Annette went missing, she was struggling with an addiction to drugs. The addiction required money, and Annette earned money as a sex worker in Edmonton. Carrie Thomason, the Edmonton social worker quoted earlier, has worked for more than 15 years to keep sex workers safe and try to help them escape life on the street. As of 2012, she was one of 2 operators for a program called Project Snug, which is an outreach and harm reduction program for sex workers on the streets. Thomason's work includes offering the workers food, clothes, and other support whenever possible. According to Thomason, Annette was really trying to enter recovery and move forward with her life. She had completed a treatment program and was making the effort, but Annette would relapse and stay tangled up in life on the streets. Thomason attributes this to Annette not having access to a good support system to be able to move past the early stages of recovery when relapse is most likely to happen. And unfortunately, when a missing person or homicide victim is identified as having challenges with addiction or works in the sex trade, they're labeled as living a high-risk lifestyle. Often, this label comes with its own set of stigma and assumptions. The investigation into Annette's whereabouts didn't produce anything of use. There was no closure at all until March of 2012, when it was confirmed by the RCMP and Edmonton's medical examiner that Annette's remains had been found. In November of 2010, hunters on a property near Westlock, Alberta, found what they believed to be human remains, specifically a human skull and other bone fragments. This was what was later confirmed to be the remains of Annette Holywhiteman, but to date, there have been no further developments in the case. If you have any information pertaining to the disappearance and murder of Annette Holywhiteman, please contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS. That's 1-800-222-8477. Cheyenne Santana Marie Fox, spirit name Kundakwi, was a member of the Loon Clan at the Wikwimikong unceded Indian Reserve on Manitoulin Island. Cheyenne was born in 1993 in Sioux Lookout, which is approximately 350 kilometers northwest of the city of Thunder Bay. Her family remembers her fondly, with her father, John Fox, saying she was, quote, very compassionate, very caring. She didn't judge anybody, end quote. Cheyenne was no stranger to struggles. Her childhood was spent living with her mother, sometimes with her father, and sometimes within youth detention centers. Cheyenne was known as a fighter, meaning she wouldn't shy away from an altercation. But there was a duality to Cheyenne, a push and pull in two different worlds. On one side of the coin, she was very immersed in Anishinaabe culture. She attended drumming socials, round dance festivals, and smudging ceremonies. Cheyenne was a proud jingle dancer and participated in powwows. As she grew into a teenager, Cheyenne shot up in height to approximately 5'10". Her father remembers this was a time of acting out, and a time where Cheyenne would drink heavily to the point where she would black out. She would find herself in trouble, either beating someone up or becoming the target of a beating herself. Cheyenne became pregnant at the age of 15 and gave birth to her son, Xavier, 9 months later. She was a proud young mother, and for a time she tried to settle down with her son's father in Manitoulin. And while this worked for around 2 years, soon the young Cheyenne became restless and longed for life in the big city of Toronto. She had dreams after all. She wanted to become a beautician or a hairstylist. Her father, John, and his wife, Danielle, opened their doors to Cheyenne, and for a time she moved into their home in Peterborough. This arrangement worked well at first, but soon Cheyenne found herself wanting more. She was determined to go to downtown Toronto, and she would make her way there. Unfortunately, once she'd arrived, instead of settling into her own apartment, she ended up seeking lodging at an Aboriginal women's shelter. And things didn't get any easier for Cheyenne. She was allegedly sexually assaulted in 2012, with the case making its way to court. She also ended up serving jail time for fighting. Her family believes it was at this time, when Cheyenne was at her most vulnerable, that she was swept easily into the world of human trafficking. Fast forward to April 25th, 2013, when Cheyenne was on her way to an apartment condo at 80 Harrison Garden Boulevard. She was allegedly there because a human trafficker known only as Ahmed had sent her on a sex work assignment. At around 6 p.m., Cheyenne is in a Toronto taxi, but something is wrong. Two individuals who happen to be on the highway witness a female jumping out of a moving taxicab. That female is Cheyenne. The unnamed witnesses immediately call police. Cheyenne alleges the taxi driver was sexually assaulting her, and in an effort to escape, she jumped from the cab and into the highway. The individuals who had intervened ended up taking her to the apartment on 80 Harrison Boulevard in North York. Police did not respond to the call made by the two witnesses who saw Cheyenne jump out of the car. In fact, police also did not respond when a call was made from the apartment Cheyenne was attending. The caller reported there was a fight between a female escort and a male customer, but it isn't immediately clear who made that phone call. These details weren't confirmed by police. However, in 2017, The Star reported an article quoting lawyer Emily Hill, from the Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto. Hill said that the recorded conversation included a dispatch speaking to both a male individual and to Cheyenne. The individual who called dispatch services for police assistance said Cheyenne was, quote, excessively intoxicated, was trespassing, and refusing to leave, end quote. According to the Star, another source said they called 911 to report a woman briefly dangling from a balcony. So if you're keeping tabs, we're up to 3 calls already with no response. 2 more calls from alarmed residents were made to 911 reporting what was going on. And 2 more times, police did not arrive to assess the situation. Tragically, police arrived on scene after a 5th, and I'll say it again, a 5th and final call. This call was from the male resident within the apartment, who has never been named in the media and apparently is currently not a suspect. The male resident said Cheyenne had jumped off his balcony. His balcony, which was on the 24th floor. Cheyenne's broken body lay on the ground below. She was pronounced deceased at the scene. Police then notified her father, John Fox. However, despite the suspicious circumstances and the multiple calls to police, the investigation was over. Open and shut case. From the time police arrived at the scene of Cheyenne's death at 11:10 p.m. the night of April 25th through to 8 a.m. the next morning, they'd concluded the case and noted the cause of death as suicide. The only witness to this horrific event? The unnamed male who'd hired Cheyenne for sex work. The very same unnamed male who had been involved in an altercation earlier in the evening with Cheyenne. Cheyenne's family refused to believe it was suicide. Although she'd struggled in the past, she was excited to try and turn her life around. She had allegedly been writing letters to her loved ones that she was going to succeed in her goals. She had her beautiful 5-year-old son, Xavier. She was on the precipice of good things to come, and tragically, she will never get to see her dreams come to fruition. Cheyenne's family was in disbelief that the coroner in her case had marked her cause of death as suicide. Because of this, John Fox requested a coroner's inquest. So a coroner's inquest is a formal court proceeding, usually with a 5 to 7 person jury, which reviews the cause and circumstances of a death. When the inquest is concluded, a ruling on the documented cause of death is delivered. And not only that, but the inquest would also set into motion a review of the circumstances of death and then seek to address any community concerns about the death. In drawing attention to the cause of death, a measure can be put in place to try and eliminate these kinds of deaths from happening. And rightfully so, a grieving father wanted his daughter's case reviewed. The request for the inquest was denied, and John Fox wasn't happy. He felt as though his efforts to understand the truth behind his daughter's tragic end were being blocked at every angle. This led him to pursue legal assistance, and he contacted Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto, where he worked with lawyer Emily Hill to again request the case be reviewed by a coroner and panel of jury members. But yet again, the request was denied. The chief coroner for Ontario, Dr. Dirk Hoyer, confirmed there would be no inquest supported in a letter to John. However, he did take some action. Dr. Hoyer changed the ruling of Cheyenne's death from suicide to undetermined. A victory, though small, for the Fox family. The broader issue, of course, being that the inquest being declined meant there would be no review or recommendations to avoid deaths like this in the future. Deaths like this being the countless deaths of First Nations women who ventured into the city. John also believes that racism plays a huge factor in missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So John Fox was not going down without a fight. In September of 2014, he filed a $14 million lawsuit against the Toronto police, alleging negligence in the events leading to Cheyenne's death, as well as during the investigation that ensued after the fact. Cheyenne's family believes she was murdered, and they will always be trying to understand what happened that day in 2013 when Cheyenne left their lives forever. If you have any information about what happened to Cheyenne Fox, please contact Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. 3 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women where foul play is not suspected. I feel like this is such an awkward place to wrap up the episode, but there really isn't anything else on the cases that I can report. I will, of course, post pictures of Abigail, Annette, and Cheyenne on my Instagram. Next week's episode will feature part 1 of a deep dive into the psychology behind serial killers. So if science and psychology is your jam, you won't want to miss this one. That's going to do it, folks, and remember, stay safe and be kind to each other.